This is U.S. History Regents Review, Unit 3, video number 4. We're talking about westward expansion at the end of the 1800s. So as people moved westward, why did they do this in the first place? Well, there were a lot of opportunities. First of all, the railroads is really what facilitated this. The railroads expanded further and further west, connecting different parts of the country that had never been easy to access before. And people are needed to work those railroads. So the railroads in particular attracted Irish and Chinese workers. And this work was very dangerous. And this is a huge reason why we see immigrant groups doing it. And the Chinese were brought in on purpose. They were seen as being tough workers. And they built most of these railroads while also facing a lot of discrimination. So this is a time when anti-immigrant feelings were rapid, and against the Irish, and especially, however, against the Chinese who were settling across the West Coast at the time of the railroad construction. The California Gold Rush of 1849, that's where the name of the football team, 49ers, comes from, brought many prospectors out west who are hoping to so-called hit the mother lode and make it rich. Very few people actually did this, but it did facilitate a lot of westward movement as people had this dream of making it rich. However, there were other kinds of miners. Miners were digging up iron, digging up coal. And remember, this theme that industrialization is directly connected to westward expansion. Iron and coal are huge contributors to the industrialization, right? We're using iron to build steel, to build skyscrapers and railroad ties. And coal is fueling a lot of the different mechanization happening, what fuels factories, engines, other things like that. So the demand for these different resources, the demand for energy, really led a lot of people to find mining to be a pretty profitable job, despite its dangers. Cowboys, very important in American lore, they were herding cattle from ranches in areas like Texas. You can see this little map here, up to the railroad lines. So what they would do is they let these cattle graze and get fat and slowly move north. And these are the railroad lines where they would be able to herd the cattle on, and then they'd be brought to eastern markets for slaughter. So again, we see this connection between urbanization, the growth of cities, and how profitable it is to herd cattle, because we need to feed these cities. They want access to meat. They don't live on farms anymore. So we are mass raising cattle. And people would be attracted to this job because they got to live out in the open. They got to kind of live that dream of individualism, being far away from the government, far away from home. And this was appealing to a lot of people. It actually was really appealing to African Americans. So a lot of Blacks in the South wanted to escape Jim Crow and segregation and oppression, and found that they could be freer out west. So there are a lot of Black cowboys. There's also a lot of Hispanic cowboys. The idea of the vaquero, the original cowboy, really was a Mexican. When we talk about Hispanic peoples who are raising these longhorn cattle. So a very diverse group. Farmers gained opportunities. Industrialization both helped and hurt farmers. First of all, the mechanization of agriculture led to much better equipment, steel plows, um, mechanical reapers, and all of these more efficient tools led to higher crop yields for farmers. So you actually were able to grow way more than ever before because of industrialization, because of this new technology. Growing urbanization in northeastern cities meant higher populations and higher demand for agricultural products. So we mentioned cattle earlier, but also this means food that we grow from the ground, different crops. City dwellers need food. And railroads are what connected Western farmers with those cities. So they are dependent on the railroads. The railroads allow them to actually sell their crops and make all this money. But as we'll see, that also becomes an issue for them. And it's not just the white settlers. There are a few African Americans who are going west and farming. They don't have exactly the same opportunities, but one example are the exodusters. A bunch of African Americans moved to Kansas to create their own community, and some of them were farmers. However, farmers out west faced some serious challenges. As farmers were able to grow more and more, which would seem like a good thing, that also means the value of their crops dropped and prices for this food dropped. Farmers struggled to afford all of this new equipment they needed because now they're competing with each other. It's now a national agricultural market. It's not just local communities growing food for their local towns. There are these huge farms out west that are growing food for cities far, far away. And they're competing with all of them. And so farmers are buying all this equipment and going into huge debt. And then the railroads that they're dependent on, that are the way that they can make money, also become the problem because they charge really high freight rates. They charge them a lot to use the railroad lines, and they had monopolies over the lines. If there's only one railroad in town, that railroad can charge whatever it wants to ship your products. Farmers who couldn't pay back all of their debt to banks could risk foreclosure on their farms and lose not just their way of making money, but their homes, their entire way of life. So farmers facing all of these struggles, here's the farmer fighting against the railroad monster, tried to work together to fix the problems that they faced. This leads to the rise of a movement called populism. Farmers began to work together trying to fix the problems they face, and they created organizations. One example would be the Grange. Another would be the Farmers Alliance, to try to share some of their resources, like rent out equipment, buy it together, to set prices for things so the price doesn't fall too low. So we see them kind of working together. We're going to see workers in cities do this too by creating labor unions. So this is kind of a farmer version. Populism, this is a political movement which is always about fighting for the rights of average people, what is most popular. And specifically during this time period, we mean average farmers and workers, factory workers, against the special interests of banks and corporations, especially the railroads. These ideas all eventually become the Populist Party and their platform. And if we look over here, so first of all, this is a primary source from the Grange. And this is about, hey, look at the farmer. I feed you all. And then it shows all these different careers that people have. They could not do their jobs if they didn't have the farmer to grow their food. And over here, this is what the Populist Party eventually stood for. So you see a really good list of the things that were most important to them. An increase in money supply. They wanted a graduated income tax. People who are richer should pay a higher percent in tax. A federal loan program. They wanted a popular election of U.S. senators by a popular vote. They will get that. That will happen. Single terms for presidents, a secret ballot to end voting fraud. That will eventually happen as well. So everyone doesn't know who you're voting for. They called for an 8-hour workday. Eventually, that will happen. And they wanted restriction on immigration. They're very anti-immigrant because they saw those people as competing with them for the jobs that they already had. One of their biggest beliefs was in something called bimetallism, bi meaning two metals. They wanted what's called free silver. They wanted the government to go off the gold standard, meaning that the government had all of its currency backed by gold. They wanted both gold and silver to be valid currency because this would create inflation, which would first of all increase their crop prices and also would help them pay back their debts. William Jennings Bryan is the really famous guy who fought for this idea and ran for president.